27. Rodin walked fast with Ratch struggling to keep up. That was good. If the man was tired, he wouldn't talk, and Rodin wouldn't have to find answers. They needed to move fast. It was late afternoon, and they had a long way to go. Rodin would prefer to reach safety before full dark. He had told Ratch to follow. At first the man had refused, saying he'd be fine where he was, probably thinking Rodin was going to kill him out on the street somewhere. But Rodin had explained in terms Ratch would understand. Rodin had been sent to kill Ratch. He had decided to renege on his contract. But that did not save Ratch's life. Once the old man or Malice heard of Ratch's continued existence, they would hire another mercenary. Rodin said he wanted to help. He was willing to show Ratch a safe place. Ratch had no option but to follow. Rodin thought through practicalities. There was another advantage in disappearing quickly. Sharoff was still unconscious. When he woke to find himself alone, he would assume his friend was dead. He would not try to follow. The streets were different as the sun faded. The shadows hid much of the filth, and the buildings looked cleaner. Even the bar looked inviting. He was tempted to take Ratch in for a drink, but they needed to keep moving. He did allow Ratch a chance to catch his breath an hour later though. They had a bite to eat and a swig of water. Just enough to keep them going. Ratch started asking questions and Rodin knew he was rested. He set off, forcing Ratch to follow. Heading south, same pace as before. He needed to keep moving. Rodin felt light. There was no pressure. He was no longer on a job. He didn't have to do anything. He was beholden to nobody. A free agent. He had thought of himself as a free agent before. He worked for himself, had responsibilities to nobody else. He took the jobs he wanted. But with each contract, with each job he accepted, he was trapped. He couldn't fail, so he had to work hard. He was risking his life for someone else's problem. More work led to more killing, his own life on the line again. Going after targets, protecting himself from revenge attacks. Never at rest. With no more contracts, that was all in the past. But he couldn't simply stop. He still needed to move. He still needed to know what he was doing. So his plan. Get Ratch to safety, go to the old man and explain, go to Malice and make sure there were no repercussions from him. Then get on with the rest of his life. Take some of his funds and disappear for a while. Enjoy his freedom. Sometime late in the evening, they turned down one of the semi-deserted streets that led to the tunnel. There were no lights from the buildings. Nobody would see them. They reached the bunker without incident. Rodin showed Ratch around his new temporary home, then headed off with the water containers. Some of the abandoned houses still had pipes connected, and Rodin was able to fill both containers. 20 liters was not much, but if Ratch was sensible it would last a while. He showed Ratch how to use the purifying tabs, and told him to boil the water if he was still unsure.
Why are you doing this?
It's a change. It was all Ratch needed to know.
Won't it look bad if you don't finish your contract?
Was the man stupid? For a moment it sounded like he was begging Rodin to reconsider. No, please don't give up your job. Kill me and carry on like before. Not if I don't want to work anymore. Ratch looked at Rodin, head to one side.
You're retiring.
Yes. The word sounded alien but comforting. Retirement. So often he had used it as another euphemism like remove. But now, it took on another meaning. Transition. A chance to stop. The start of something new.
But you're a legend. I know who you are, and you're like the mercenary.
Rodin raised his eyebrows.
You're Rodin, aren't you?
Rodin felt pinpricks on his neck, felt the hairs on his arms stand tall. What makes you say that?
I'm sure I've seen your face around somewhere. And then there's what you did, back at the house. It's what you do. You use a lance, and you knocked Sharav out rather than killing him. Rodin only kills when he has no other choice. Apart from the target, that is. And the target always ends up dead.
Always. Ratch shrugged.
Maybe not this time. Not if you're retiring. But every other time. Tell me, is it true that you went into the dome?
Rodin wasn't sure how he felt about this. What have you heard?
Oh, how you snuck in and lived in there for like a month, or maybe 2. And how you removed one of their top people, right in his office. There are some rumors that you killed a few others as well.
The walls of the bunker were cold concrete, half hidden in the dim light from the lantern. The room was small, too small for 2. A few paces and he could cover the floor. The roof was low, almost reaching his head when he stood. Ratch sitting on the bed was too close. Rodin had told nobody of what had happened in the dome, not even Jenna. But somebody somewhere must have talked. And the tales had grown legs, each teller making them a fraction more interesting, a touch more exciting, yet slightly less believable. But there was enough of the truth in what Ratch said to make Rodin nervous. He had never heard these rumors about himself. Reading, listening, insinuating himself in dark corners, and never had he heard his own name mentioned. Never had he heard others talk of what he had done. Was it because he had been recognized? Rodin lived in the shadows. He moved where he wanted to. He was unknown, unknowable. And yet this man, nothing but a controller, someone Rodin had never crossed, knew who Rodin was. Recognized him. Even knew how he operated. Was he that predictable? Was he that vulnerable? Another thought came, cutting through like a blade. If others recognized him, if others knew of what he did, then could someone know of his past? Maybe someone knew who he was. Ratch was carrying on, becoming more animated.
So is it true? Did you get in? Was it all free and easy, like they say? Nothing to do but hang around all day, getting everything you want.
The common misconception about the DOME that life was easy. In some ways it was. But it was all a facade, and it was hard work keeping that up. When you got annoyed with someone in the dome, you had to be polite and talk things through. When you wanted to let off steam, you had to be careful who was in earshot. You had to watch yourself the whole time. There are far too many rumors, was his reply. He was going to add something about preferring life in the districts, but knew that would be admitting to his presence in the dome, which would only lead to more questions. Ratch was waiting for more, a childlike excitement in his eyes. But Rodin wasn't going to satisfy him. It was none of the man's business. This must have dawned on Ratch after a few minutes' silence, because he changed tack.
So, if you're retiring, what are you going to do with yourself?
What do people usually do when they're not working?
I don't know. Drink. Sleep. Have a laugh.
There you go then. Another silence. Rodin stood. Stay here. If you need more water, the first house you come to still has the pipes connected. If you go out, keep your eyes sharp and don't let anyone see you come in here. Once I've gone, lock up. Don't open that hatch for anyone, unless you know exactly who they are. He pointed to the grill. You've got another exit here.
You're going.
Rodin nodded.
To sort out Effie's old man.
A shrug. I'll have to see him. Ratch had that look like he wanted to say more. Rodin waited.
She looked up to him, She never wanted anything bad to happen to her dad. I know he didn't approve of what she did, and I know he hated me, but she worshipped him.
He shook his head.
But malice was a different matter. She couldn't stand him.
Rodin was intrigued. But he was a client. A flicker of surprise.
How do you?
Then realization.
I see. Investigations and all that. Yes, he was a client. When I found out who he was, I tried to dissuade her, Even though she didn't think of him as a brother, it didn't sit right. But she insisted. She said it kept the bastard close where she could keep an eye on him. Her own words.
Why did she need to keep an eye on him? A shrug.
He was back on the scene. She didn't trust him, and she didn't want him to hurt her dad. I think it gave her something over him. She was good, Effie. One of the best. She could play people so well. She knew that if word reached her father, he would assume Malice was forcing her, He'd break with his son again. So it gave her power over him. The little shit thought he was tough, but she had him exactly where she wanted him.
What did Malice get out of it?
Who knows? Maybe he thought it gave him a hold over her. Maybe he was trying to prove a point. Honestly, I don't like dealing with his sort. I like to think my clients want companionship in order to feel better. His sort don't feel. They use my girls and boys. They don't give a stuff for companionship.
The controller looked up.
I don't know how everything's going to play out when you get back. I know Effie wouldn't want her old man to suffer, But she wouldn't give a rat's ass what happens to Malice. If he was never seen again, that would be a good start.
Rodin understood perfectly. I'll see what I can do. But you need to stay here and keep your head down. A nod.
So when will it be safe for me to come out?
I'd give it at least a week. Possibly a couple. Just to be safe. Ratch's mouth dropped open.
2 weeks,
he said to the space behind Rodin. Rodin nodded. 2 weeks and you're safe. He wondered if that was true. He turned, heading up into the concrete building above. He waited until he heard the sound of bolts sliding into place, then walked out into the early morning. Rodin took a deep breath before starting on his long walk. The sun rose slowly. Rodin didn't feel tired. Physically, he knew his muscles were straining and they could do with a rest. But within himself, he felt awake and alert. He felt better than he had in a long time. Landmarks leapt out as he passed, forcing their way into his mind, dislodging a torrent of memories. Particular buildings, or a specific front door. A curving path now overgrown. A waste ground between buildings, the stonework of the demolished house now covered over. He saw a park where he'd been attacked, a group of 3 men determined to take his money. He had none, but he recalled feeling annoyed that they'd even try. He wore torn clothing, he looked like crap, and yet they decided to pick on him, ignoring the far more affluent people walking nearby. They were selecting him as an easy target, not a high-value one. In hindsight, Rodin knew it was this anger that had saved him. He had fought back, not caring what happened, and the 3 men had raced off. One of them had been clutching his arm close to his chest, and another was leaving a trail of blood. Rodin had some injuries, he remembered feeling pain and seeing blood, but he was alive and he'd won. He came to a couple of shops. The one on the left used to sell all kinds of hardware tools, bits and bobs to fix things, oil, petrol. It was boarded up now, shut down, but Rodin had worked here. Some of the time he would serve customers. The rest of the time he would acquire goods to sell. Sometimes he'd wait outside, following a customer as they walked up the road. He'd wait for an opportunity, then snatch their bag, racing off while they were still in shock, returning to the shop after a few hours, where the items the customer had paid for were once more placed on display, once more up for sale. And any spare money in the customer's bag went into the till. But not all of it. That was why he'd had to leave. He remembered turning in one morning to see the angry face of the owner, knowing he'd been rumbled. And he had fled instantly. He must have moved on after that. Further south. Yes, heading towards the dome. As he walked now, he could see the curved surface up ahead, could see the morning light bringing a glow to the glass. But he didn't head straight, either then or now. He drifted. He meandered. Then he went wherever the scent of work took him. Now, he allowed his feet to retrace their steps. He walked into his memories. The dome was visible all the time, a smooth presence over the roofs of the buildings. He was closer by the next evening. If he'd been walking straight, he'd be at the glass itself by now. He needed a rest. Ratch, back in the bunker, had a chance to sleep. Rodin had been on his feet, drifting along for over 24 hours. He found a hostel and paid for a booth. It would be inaccurate to call it a room, as there was barely space to move. A bed, a few hooks for clothes, and shared toilet facilities along a grimy corridor. There was a lamp over the bed, and a small window high on the wall, allowing in only a thin streak of light. The door locked from the inside, but Rodin set up the tripwire. Old habits. He slept well, and didn't recall any of his dreams when he woke, with the sun already making its lazy way through the glass. He paid for a perfunctory breakfast in the canteen, longing for a decent omelette. He checked his screen for the first time in what felt like days. He read a few news sources, not much of interest happening, then checked for messages. He had one from Joran. Strange, he thought. It looked like the techie had spent a bit more time on the data recovered from Ratch's screen. He said he'd found something interesting. He wanted to meet. Did Rodin want to meet Joran? He was no longer after Ratch, so any more information was useless. Joran was reaching out. That wasn't his style. Something was wrong. It didn't matter. Rodin could ignore the message. He was going to disappear. Joran had helped Rodin. He was harmless, but easily led by his addiction. Rodin felt he wasn't sure what. Not friendship, but a desire to protect the man. No, not that far. Rodin didn't want Joran to come to any harm. He didn't deserve it. And Rodin thought of Ratch, of what he had said in the bunker, how those like Malice simply used others. Joran didn't do this. Nor did Ratch himself. They cared, each in their own way, for those around them. Malice cared only for himself. And Rodin himself. As he left the hostel, he felt the vague warmth from the sun. He was almost free.